Call the cops, she's ruining the neighborhood. That's what HOA President Brenda Thornfield screamed before dialing 911 on my wife for planting wildflowers in her own front yard. It was 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. My wife, Patricia, was kneeling in the damp Colorado soil, hands covered in earth that smelled like rain and new beginnings. She wore her oldest jeans, hair spilling out of a messy ponytail. Across the street stood Brenda, perched on her perfectly fertilized lawn, makeup flawless, pointing her manicured finger like a judge at trial. Minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. The officer stepped out, took a few steps toward the so-called criminal gardener, then froze. His jaw dropped. You see, Patricia isn't just any homeowner, she's Judge Blackwood, the same woman who sentences real criminals in court. Brenda's clipboard slipped from her hands and hit the pavement with a plastic crack. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Now let me rewind. My name's Marcus Blackwood, 58, a retired Colorado Springs firefighter who spent 32 years running into burning buildings. Patricia, my wife, has served as a municipal judge for over 15 years, known for her patience, fairness, and iron will. 3 years ago, we moved into Willowbrook Estates, chasing that picture-perfect retirement. Curved streets with tree names, identical beige houses, and kids leaving chalk drawings on sidewalks. Patricia adored our big front yard. For years she dreamed of planting a real garden, not just keeping a few pots on an apartment balcony, but across the street lives Brenda Thornfield, 62, a former real estate agent who treats her HOA presidency like she's commanding a small kingdom. She's the type who irons her jeans and arranges her tools by color. For the first 2 years, things were fine. We paid dues, kept our lawn trimmed, never broke the rules. Then Patricia decided to replace our thirsty Kentucky bluegrass with native Colorado flowers, columbines, paintbrush, blanket flowers. Plants that belonged here, plants that actually helped the land. She spent weekends planting, the air filled with the fragrance of lavender and soil. That's when Brenda pounced. One morning, as I drank my coffee, I heard the sharp click, click of her heels approaching. She stormed up our walkway waving a piece of paper. "This violates community standards," she barked. "I'm fining you $200 for non-compliant landscaping." Patricia stood up, brushed the dirt from her knees, and calmly asked, "Which specific covenant are you referring to?" Brenda's nostrils flared. "Section 12.44. It says landscaping must fit community aesthetic standards." But Patricia knew the rules. She had studied the HOA documents line by line. The covenant only required removing dead plants, mowing grass, and keeping yards tidy. Nothing outlawed wildflowers. Brenda wasn't making a mistake, she was enforcing her own vision of perfection. And Patricia wasn't her only target. We soon learned about others. Frank Clav, a 74-year-old Vietnam vet, fined $150 for growing tomatoes where his late wife's roses once bloomed. Sarah Quinn, a single mom, forced to pay $300 to erase her kids' chalk drawings. The pattern was clear. Brenda bullied those she thought couldn't fight back. But that morning, as Patricia set her coffee mug down, her voice steady and unyielding, she said, "We're not paying this fine." And that's when the real battle began. 2 days after Patricia refused to pay the so-called fine, we received a certified letter so pompous our mailman actually apologized for dropping it off. The return address was embossed because of course it was. Inside, the penalty had magically doubled to $400. According to the letter, the HOA had held an emergency board meeting to review our outrageous violation. Supposedly a unanimous vote had been taken, penalties increased, and we had 10 days to pay or face a lien on our property. There was just one issue. The meeting never happened. That afternoon, Patricia called every board member, one by one. Old Frank Kozlov's gravelly voice crackled over speakerphone. Emergency meeting? Lady, I've been in Denver all week visiting my grandson. Haven't heard a word about it. 2 other board members said the same thing. They had never been notified, never voted, never even seen the official minutes. Turns out Brenda's idea of a unanimous vote was herself, her neighbor Dorothy, and Dorothy's husband Carl, who spends most meetings snoring in a lawn chair, but Patricia had an advantage. Years earlier, at a dull municipal law seminar, she'd taken meticulous notes on HOA governance while half the room slept. Colorado law clearly requires 14 days written notice before any fine, plus a hearing where the homeowner can defend themselves. Brenda had ignored all of it. Legally, her fine wasn't worth more than a scribbled grocery list dot, so Patricia did what she does best, filed the proper complaint with the Colorado HO. She knew the right forms, the right deadlines, and exactly how to put them on Brenda's desk with a thud. That's when the surveillance campaign began. Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., Brenda's white Lexus would creep down our street like a shark in search of prey. She'd park across from our house, engine humming, air conditioning blasting even when it was barely 70 degrees outside. Click. A slightly brown blade of grass photographed. Click. The garden hose coiled instead of hung photographed. Click. 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 Yesterday's newspaper still on the driveway at 6:15 am. Photograph. The slam of her car door became our neighborhood alarm clock. Frank even started timing his morning walks just to watch her scatter back to her car whenever he waved and called. Morning, Brenda. Getting your cardio in? But here's where Brenda miscalculated. While she obsessed over petty snapshots of our wildflowers, Patricia was quietly building something far more dangerous, a case. She began gathering stories. During her evening jog, she'd stop by neighbors' houses. At the grocery store, she'd strike up conversations. Slowly, piece by piece, she uncovered a disturbing pattern. Frank's tomatoes weren't his first offense. Brenda had once fined him $50 for displaying his Purple Heart license plate holder, calling it non-standard vehicle decoration. She only backed down after his veteran friends raised hell. Sarah Quinn's chalk art. That was her 3rd strike. First came a warning about her kids' bikes being left in the driveway. Then a $50 fine because her 6-year-old forgot a soccer ball on the lawn overnight. Each time, Sarah just paid because single moms juggling 2 jobs don't have the luxury of legal fights. Even the widow on Pine Street wasn't safe. She was cited for excessive bird feeding because Brenda claimed her bird bath was attracting pests. The truth? Brenda just didn't like the sound of songbirds during her backyard. Phone calls. Every victim had one thing in common: they were either vulnerable, struggling, or unwilling to bow before Brenda's suburban throne. And then came the twist. One evening, while reviewing her notes, Patricia paused mid-sip of coffee. She had cross-referenced Brenda's violation dates with the HOA's official meeting records. What she found changed everything. Every single violation notice had one thing in common: they were all issued during weeks when at least 3 board members were conveniently out of town. Brenda wasn't just inventing meetings. She was carefully timing her campaigns to make sure no one could challenge her. That evening, Patricia looked up from her notes, her voice calm but edged with the same steel I'd once heard when she handed down sentences to repeat offenders. "She's not just power-hungry," Patricia said. "She's strategic. This is intimidation, systematic and deliberate." Soon, the smell of printer ink and fresh coffee became permanent fixtures in our home office. Patricia spent hours building her counterattack, piece by piece. Every photo Brenda snapped, every bogus violation letter, every arbitrary rule, all of it was being cataloged by someone who knew how to build a bulletproof case. Patricia wasn't playing defense. She was playing chess. And Brenda? She was still fumbling around with checkers. Then came what Brenda thought was her trump card, the architectural review process. A certified letter arrived thick as a legal brief, dripping with pretension. Brenda now claimed our wildflower garden required approval from the HOA's Architectural Review Committee. In her interpretation, any change to existing vegetation demanded advance permission from a 3-person panel. Here's the reality. Those committees exist to stop your neighbor from painting their house neon orange or putting a 20-foot statue of Elvis on the lawn. They were never meant to dictate whether you plant daisies or columbines. But Brenda didn't care. She scheduled a formal hearing 48 hours notice. Basement of the community center. Bring documentation. She even announced she was bringing in an expert witness, a landscaper who would argue that native Colorado plants were somehow inappropriate for Colorado soil. Patricia hung up the phone after hearing the news and smiled. Not her neighborly smile, her courtroom smile, the one that makes defense attorneys shuffle papers nervously. She wants a hearing? Patricia said, opening the closet door. Fine, let's give her a hearing. Thursday night, 6:30. The community center basement smelled like decades of potlucks and low-budget meetings, a stale mix of burnt coffee, industrial carpet, and that faint mildew no cleaner ever quite removes. Fluorescent lights buzzed like tired insects overhead, casting the room in the color of bureaucracy itself. Beige. At a folding table sat Brenda, flanked by Dorothy and Carl. Brenda wore her most corporate expression, as if she were chairing a Fortune 500 board meeting instead of arguing about flowers. She even brought a briefcase. And then Patricia arrived. She walked in wearing her full black judicial robe, polished nameplate gleaming, the Honorable Patricia Blackwood. Her hair was pulled back in the severe bun she reserved for sentencing hearings. In her hand, a sleek leather briefcase worth more than some people's mortgage payments. The effect was devastating. Brenda's stiff posture deflated instantly. Dorothy fiddled with her glasses. Carl blinked awake for the first time in years and whispered, "Wait, is somebody getting arrested?" Patricia didn't miss a beat. She set down her case, straightened, and in her commanding courtroom voice said, "Good evening. I understand we're here to discuss Colorado statutes regarding an HOA's authority over native plant cultivation." The room went silent. Patricia set her briefcase on the table and opened it with a quiet click. Inside wasn't just paperwork, it was a full legal dossier. Case citations, precedent rulings, side-by-side photographs of every single flower in our yard, labeled with their Latin names and ecological benefits. Brenda's so-called expert witness shuffled in behind her. It was none other than Roger Pembroke, Brenda's real estate partner, a man who probably couldn't tell the difference between a dandelion and a daisy. Patricia adjusted her glasses and asked smoothly, "Mr. Pembroke, could you please identify the difference between Aquilegia caerulea and Aquilegia chrysantha?" Roger blinked. What? Patricia held up the field guide. "One is Colorado's state flower, the blue columbine. The other is its yellow cousin. Both native, both thriving in my garden. Which one, exactly, violates your standards?" Roger froze like a deer in a spotlight. "Well, it's not really about specific plants. Then what is this hearing about?" Patricia pressed. And then came the knockout. Patricia casually slid a stack of photographs across the table taken that very afternoon. "Not of our yard." "Of Brenda's, Mrs. Thornfield," Patricia said evenly. "Can you explain why your decorative fence exceeds the 6-foot height limit by 8 inches? Without approval?" Brenda's face turned several shades of red. That's decorative screening. It's different. And this pond in your backyard?" Built with no review process at all? That's a water feature. And your hot tub placement 4 feet inside the required 15-foot setback. Care to explain? The only sound in the room was Patricia's pen scratching. Notes. Every excuse, every contradiction, every stumble recorded by someone who had spent 15 years watching defendants lie under oath. Neighbors had started filing in quietly. 2. Frank was there. Sarah came. 3 more families Brenda had bullied sat in folding chairs like jurors watching justice unfold. Finally, Brenda slammed her papers shut. "This hearing is concluded," she snapped. But Patricia leaned forward, her voice calm as a gavel. "Actually, Mrs. Thornfield, just one more question. When did this committee receive the legal authority to regulate native vegetation?" Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Even the buzzing fluorescent lights seemed deafening. Brenda had been dismantled in her own mock courtroom, but she wasn't done lashing out. Exactly 1 week later, every mailbox in Willowbrook Estates held an official-looking letter stamped in bold red. Emergency Special Assessment Notice. According to Brenda, the HOA now faced crippling legal costs defending against frivolous complaints from so-called problem residents. The solution? An immediate $5,000 fee from every household. No payment plans, no appeals. 30 days or else. The letter dripped with manipulation. It claimed one selfish neighbor was endangering the community and draining their retirement savings, all because she refused to follow the rules like everyone else. It was a blatant attempt to turn the entire neighborhood against us. But Brenda's fatal mistake? She scheduled a mandatory HOA meeting to explain her scheme. And she picked the very same community center basement where Patricia had already obliterated her in front of the board. Sunday, 2 p.m. The room was packed tighter than a subway car at rush hour. Retirees who hadn't attended an HOA meeting in years showed up clutching Brenda's letter like it was Exhibit A in a trial. The stage was set. The basement was overflowing. Young parents squeezed between folding chairs, toddlers wriggling and fussing in the heavy air. The smell of fried chicken and green bean casserole from a church potluck earlier still clung to the room, but no one felt comforted. At the front, Brenda stood tall in a navy blazer that screamed, "Trust me with your money." On either side, Dorothy and a half-asleep Carl. A rickety old projector hummed behind her, ready to display her PowerPoint presentation like it was Wall Street earnings instead of neighborhood squabbles. "Friends and neighbors," she began, her voice polished with real estate sincerity. "Our community faces an unprecedented financial crisis, all because one household refuses to respect our standards." Click. Her first slide appeared. Legal Defense Fund. $35,000 needed. The number hung in the stale air like a death sentence for retirees living on pensions. Heads shook. Whispers rippled. That's when Patricia rose from the back row. She'd been sitting quietly beside me and Frank, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, blending in. But the moment she stood, the energy in the room shifted. Shoulders straight, notes in hand, her calm presence carried the weight of authority. "Excuse me, Mrs. Thornfield," Patricia said, her voice slicing through the room without needing a microphone. "Before we discuss assessments, could you clarify exactly which legal expenses we're paying for?" Brenda faltered. "Well, obviously, the costs of defending against your harassment campaign and frivolous state complaints." "I see," Patricia replied. "And which law firm is representing the HOA?" "We've retained Morris & Burke and Associates," Brenda answered quickly. Patricia gave a slow nod, then lifted a folder. "Interesting, because according to the Colorado Open Records request I filed last week, the HOA hasn't paid Morris & Burke a dime. Instead, It has paid $47,000 to Thornfield Property Solutions, your company, over the past 2 years. Could you explain what services those fees were for?" The crowd stirred like a gust of wind had blown through. Brenda flushed. "Those are legitimate consulting fees. For what exactly?" Patricia pressed. "Because this invoice shows $8,000 billed for landscaping consultation during months when no landscaping work was ever done." Frank suddenly stood up, his voice booming. "She charged me $50 for pulling weeds from my wife's memorial. Rose garden. Guess where that money went? Thornfield Property Solutions." From the middle rows, Sarah spoke up. "My vegetable garden fine, she told me it went to community beautification, but my check was written to her company." The temperature in the basement seemed to plummet. Retirees who'd walked in clutching their assessment letters now held them like evidence. Patricia's voice grew stronger, her courtroom cadence undeniable. "And there's one more thing. According to state records, this HOA's corporate status was dissolved 18 months ago for failure to file renewal fees, which means, legally, the organization does not exist. Every fine, every fee, every assessment collected during that time has been funneled directly into accounts controlled by Mrs. Thornfield." The silence that followed was suffocating. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the shuffle of shoes, even a toddler announcing loudly that he needed the potty dot at the front. Brenda stood frozen. Her mouth opened and closed as if words might escape, but nothing came. Finally, Frank broke the silence, his gravelly voice cutting like a blade. "Lady, are you telling us you've been stealing our money?" The basement exploded like a soda can shaken too long. "Stealing?" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking higher than a teenager's. "I have worked tirelessly for this community, but nobody was buying it anymore. Every fee we collect goes straight to maintenance and community upgrades." Brenda snapped. Patricia didn't flinch. "Then you won't mind sharing the bank statements," she said evenly. That's when Brenda cracked. She slammed her briefcase shut, toppled her folding chair, and stormed toward the stairs, spitting out something about ungrateful neighbors and calling her liar. The slam of the basement door rang out like a judge's gavel, final and absolute. What Brenda didn't realize was that her downfall had already been sealed. Patricia had spent the previous week teaming up with her paralegal friend, Jennifer, combing through courthouse archives and corporate filings. The kind of paperwork that most people would rather chew glass than read. But to Patricia, the details told a story and she knew exactly what she was looking for. The real evidence wasn't hidden. It was sitting right out in the open at the Secretary of State's office. By law, every HOA must file yearly reports like any other corporation. Miss those filings 2 years in a row, and the state dissolves your legal status automatically. It's like forgetting to renew your driver's license, but instead of a fine at the DMV, you're suddenly collecting thousands of dollars with no legal authority to do so. Brenda hadn't filed in 2022 or 2023 or 2024 for a year and a half. She had been issuing fines and pocketing fees in the name of an HOA that technically no longer existed. Every payment, every consulting charge, went into her personal accounts, not into any transparent, monitored HOA account. And that was just the appetizer. Jennifer's deeper dive uncovered something even uglier. When she cross-checked Brenda's violation history against fair housing databases, a disturbing pattern emerged. The fines weren't random. They fell on households that fit a very specific profile: elderly residents unlikely to fight back, single parents juggling too much to argue. Families who didn't match Brenda's glossy vision of suburban life. It was discrimination hiding in plain sight. Frank's veteran plate holder, Sarah's children's chalk art, a widow's bird bath, my wife's wildflower garden. Each citation was targeted, calculated, designed to squeeze those least likely to resist. By the time Patricia stacked the documents on our kitchen table that night, the picture was undeniable. Bank statements, corporate filings, violation letters, photos, dates, all of it woven into a case that spelled systematic fraud and deliberate discrimination. She sipped her tea, eyes steady on the evidence spread before her like a general surveying a battle map. "We could walk this over to the district attorney tomorrow," she said calmly. And in that moment, I knew Brenda's reign over our neighborhood was finished. Sure, Brenda might end up cutting a deal, paying restitution, serving probation, maybe a slap on the wrist. But that wouldn't bring back Frank's memorial garden. It wouldn't erase the fear Sarah felt every time Brenda's car crawled past her driveway. It wouldn't undo 2 years of harassment that had poisoned our neighborhood. Patricia's eyes had that unmistakable fire, the same look I'd seen when she sat on the bench with repeat offenders who showed zero remorse. For her, justice wasn't only about punishment. It was about making sure the harm stopped and that healing could finally begin. "So," I asked, "what do you want to do?" She smiled. Not her polite neighborly smile. Not her courtroom smile. This one was sharper, brighter. A smile that said she already had a plan. Want to give Brenda exactly what she's been demanding all this time, a community that follows the rules. Every single one of them. Including the rules about fraud, embezzlement, and discrimination. The scent of chamomile tea mingled with the quiet thrill of justice being set into motion. Outside our window, the wildflowers in our garden swayed defiantly in the glow of the street lamp. Every petal felt like a small promise of the victory ahead. By morning, our kitchen had transformed into mission control. Patricia dubbed it Operation Wildflower Justice. At 8 a.m. sharp, our ragtag but determined legal team gathered around the breakfast table. Patricia sat at the head, laptop open, 3 yellow legal pads filled with her neat, deliberate handwriting. Frank arrived with his trademark military precision and a bulging folder thick enough to serve as a doorstop. Sarah came armed with her smartphone, a portable printer, and the kind of social media savvy that turns ordinary frustration into a grassroots movement. The air was heavy with the smell of Patricia's famous coffee cake, printer ink, and pure righteous determination. Patricia laid out the strategy, her voice steady. First priority, restore the HOA's legal standing the right way. "Frank, you're going to be our new president." Frank nearly spit out his coffee. "Ma'am, I just want to grow tomatoes in peace." Patricia smiled knowingly. "And you will, but first, we need someone trustworthy, someone who's already served his country, to rebuild this HOA from the ground up." She explained how Colorado's laws worked. Once an HOA misses annual filings, its corporate status dissolves. But residents can revive it by submitting new incorporation papers, paying the overdue fees, and holding elections with proper notice. Simple, really, which is exactly why Brenda thought she could keep ignoring it. The overlooked technicality? While the HOA was dissolved, none of its covenants were legally enforceable. Brenda hadn't just been collecting money illegally, she'd been enforcing rules she had no legal power to enforce. Second priority, Patricia continued, we freeze the accounts and recover every dollar she took. That's where Sarah leaned in. For months, she'd been building a digital database linking Brenda's violation notices to bank deposits and time-stamped emails. Her background in marketing made her a natural at data tracking, and her records were more meticulous than a forensic accountant's. "I've got 3 years' worth of next-door posts," Sarah said, scrolling through her files. Every time she complained about certain types of people not belonging here. Plus, we've got doorbell footage from 6 neighbors' videos of her sneaking around, snapping photos without permission. The evidence was piling up, piece by piece. until it looked less like a neighborhood dispute and more like a full-blown case. Recovering the stolen money meant pulling every string Patricia could. Through her courthouse connections, a friend introduced us to a civil attorney who specialized in HOA fraud. That's when we learned something shocking. Under Colorado's consumer protection laws, illegally assessed homeowners can sue for triple damages plus attorney fees. Third priority, Patricia declared, slipping into her unmistakable courtroom tone, "We make sure this never happens again, not here, not anywhere." She explained what her years on the bench had taught her. Scammers like Brenda rarely stop at one neighborhood. A quick dive into business records confirmed her suspicion. Thornfield Property Solutions had contracts with 4 more HOAs around Colorado Springs. Frank leaned back in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. "So we're not just fighting Brenda. We're dismantling an entire racket," Patricia corrected him gently. "We're following the evidence and making sure every homeowner in this city knows their rights." That's when Sarah's eyes lit up. "I can build a website, a resource hub for HOA rights. Step-by-step guides, warning signs of fraud, even a searchable tool by neighborhood." The mood in the room lightened when Frank suggested a name for our new task force, the Covenant Enforcement Committee. Patricia laughed so hard she nearly spilled coffee on her notes, but beneath the laughter was real strategy. Patricia didn't want to blow the whistle too early. Her plan was to let Brenda keep playing sheriff, each violation notice and bogus fine adding another brick to the wall of evidence. "Every dollar she tries to squeeze from someone is another charge," Patricia explained. "Every nasty comment is another line in the record. And now that people know what to watch for, we'll catch everything." By noon, we'd officially filed the paperwork to bring Willowbrook Estates HOA back from the dead. Frank was sworn in as interim president until we could hold proper elections. Sarah launched a private Facebook group where neighbors could upload proof without fear. And Patricia was already sharpening her case for a courtroom showdown that Brenda would regret. Victory was close enough to taste sweet like Patricia's coffee cake, with a kick of adrenaline. But Brenda wasn't about to surrender quietly. Within 48 hours, she went nuclear. Her counterattack began with a formal complaint to the Colorado Commission on Judicial Discipline, 3 dense pages accusing Patricia of abusing her position to bully an innocent volunteer. She alleged judicial bias, conflict of interest, and even claimed Patricia was weaponizing the legal system for personal gain. Patricia read the complaint over her lunch break, then calmly filed it into what she jokingly calls her "people who don't understand the law" folder. That evening, as she clipped dead blossoms from her wildflower garden, she smiled to herself. Brenda just made her biggest mistake yet. She challenged a sitting judge on procedural grounds without the faintest clue how judicial ethics actually work. But Brenda wasn't finished. Not even close. Thursday delivered a new twist. A private investigator. I was in the yard swapping out a sprinkler head when a beat-up sedan parked across the street. Inside sat a man in a wrinkled suit, raising his camera in plain sight and snapping shots of our house like he was documenting a crime scene. When I waved and started walking toward him, he floored it, tires screeching as he sped away. By that afternoon, Sarah's Ring camera caught the same guy prowling near Patricia's reserved courthouse parking spot. Thanks to Frank's military network, we learned his name by nightfall: Gary Kellner, a bargain bin pie known for taking the kind of cases that reputable investigators wouldn't touch. The harassment escalated quickly. By Friday, anonymous flyers littered car windshields all over the neighborhood. Grainy photos of Patricia in her judge's robe screamed headlines like "Corrupt Judge Among U.S." and "Is Your Neighbor Above the Law?" The whole thing looked like a bad conspiracy zine from the 1980s, oversized fonts, exclamation points everywhere. But Saturday brought the ugliest blow yet. At the garden center, I was loading mulch into the truck when I heard a familiar voice. Brenda, there's the husband. The judge's husband. They think they're better than the rest of us. She wasn't whispering, she was practically shouting, staging her performance 2 aisles over so everyone in the checkout line could hear. The woman had officially shifted from HOA president to full-time gossip and slander specialist. That afternoon, Patricia's court administrator called with troubling news. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint alleging Patricia was handling cases involving our neighborhood, creating conflicts of interest. The signature was missing, but the formatting down to the letterhead was unmistakably Brenda's. They want me to step away from every HOA-related case in the county, Patricia explained, her voice low but razor sharp. Parking disputes, zoning violations, small claims, all of it. The absurdity was staggering. Brenda was essentially demanding that a sitting municipal judge disqualify herself from a huge portion of her docket simply because Brenda didn't. Like being caught in fraud. Sunday night is what crossed the final line. Patricia's 78-year-old mother was staying with us, enjoying her summer visit. She was out watering the wildflowers before dinner when Brenda stormed across the street like a woman on a mission. Excuse me. Brenda barked, startling her so badly she dropped the watering can. You need to tell your daughter to stop this harassment right now. My mother-in-law blinked in disbelief. I'm sorry, dear. Do I know you? I'm the HOA president, Brenda announced, voice dripping with self-importance. Your daughter is destroying our community with her lawsuits. As her mother, it's your responsibility to control her behavior. Control her behavior. As if Patricia was a rebellious teenager instead of a seasoned judge. Frank happened to be walking his dog nearby and caught the whole exchange. By the time I got outside, my mother-in-law wasn't trembling from fear, she was shaking with fury. That night, she retold the story 4 times at the kitchen table, each version more fiery than the last. The smell of her stress-baked chocolate chip cookies filled the room while Patricia quietly reviewed judicial ethics guidelines. Finally, Patricia looked up, her voice steady. She just threatened my mother to get to me. That's not legal maneuvering. That's desperation. And desperate people make catastrophic mistakes. Monday morning proved her right. A certified letter landed on Patricia's courthouse desk, a federal lawsuit, thick as a novel and twice as theatrical. The lawsuit came wrapped in heavy legal jargon, stamped with the intimidating title, Thornfield v. Blackwood, Civil Rights Violations under Color of Law. On paper, it looked formidable, the kind of filing that might intimidate anyone unfamiliar with the system. In reality, it was nothing more than smoke and mirrors legal nonsense dressed up in formal formatting, like spray painting gold on scrap metal and calling it treasure. Still, even baseless lawsuits demand a response. And responses take time, energy, and money, exactly what Brenda was counting on. Over dinner that night, Patricia pointed at the growing pile of paperwork beside her plate. This isn't about winning, she said, her tone as steady as ever. It's about exhausting me. She wants me tied up with attorneys and filings while she plays the victim. But Brenda wasn't done. Her real spectacle came the very next afternoon. Patricia's urgent call reached me while I was elbows deep in the garage, replacing brake pads. Marcus, her voice carried that restrained fire only she had. Get to the courthouse now. When I arrived, the scene was surreal. There was Brenda right in the middle of the municipal courthouse lobby, waving a handmade sign scrawled with, "Corrupt Judge Blackwood, where is justice?" She had planted herself directly in front of the security checkpoint, the one place guaranteed to funnel every attorney, every defendant, and every court staff member past her one-woman protest. The sterile scent of disinfectant mixed with the awkward silence of people pretending not to watch. But they all did. Brenda's voice rang through the lobby like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. This judge abuses her power to terrorize innocent homeowners. She thinks she's above the law. Court staff were helpless legally. They couldn't remove her for standing in a public space with a sign. The chief judge had already been called. Patricia's chambers had been called. And then, as if the scene weren't absurd enough, Detective Ray Kowalski happened to walk through the metal detectors on his way to testify in an unrelated case. Ray knew Patricia well. He'd testified in her courtroom dozens of times, domestic cases, petty crimes. He respected her for being fair, precise, and impossible to sway with emotion. But as he scanned the lobby, he also knew exactly what he was looking at. Chaos in heels holding a cardboard sign. In his calm professional officer's voice, he approached. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" Brenda spun on him dramatically, her sign nearly tipping sideways. "Yes, there's a problem. This corrupt judge is persecuting me for doing my job as an HOA president." Ray paused, glanced at the cameras recording every second, then pulled out his small black notebook. "And your name is?" "Brenda Thornfield, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA." She jabbed her finger toward the courtroom doors. "That woman in there is ruling on cases that directly benefit her personal vendetta against me." The acoustics of the lobby carried every syllable into nearby courtrooms, turning Brenda's meltdown into an unwilling broadcast for lawyers and staff across the building. Ray scribbled something down, then asked evenly, "Can you tell me exactly? Which cases Judge Blackwood has heard that involve you personally?" Brenda faltered. "Well, none yet, but she could. It's the potential bias that matters." The silence that followed said more than any gavel could. She wasn't accusing Patricia of actual misconduct, just imaginary scenarios of her own. Invention. Ray's hand rested casually on his duty belt, but his eyes were doing the kind of quiet math that only seasoned cops know how to calculate. On one side, Patricia, kneeling in the dirt, the very picture of calm domestic sanity. On the other, Brenda Thornfield, HOA president turned self-appointed crusader, clutching her binder of bylaws like it was the Constitution. "Mrs. Thornfield," Ray began, his voice steady as bedrock, "you're alleging that Judge Blackwood is vandalizing community property by tending flowers in her own yard?" "Yes." Brenda snapped, flipping open her folder to reveal color-coded printouts of HOA regulations. She jabbed a manicured finger at the pages. Section 14, subsection B. Landscaping must conform to community standards. These invasive weeds she calls flowers are a violation. By refusing to remove them, she's committing destruction of property. Community property. Ray let the silence stretch. A crow cawed somewhere in the distance, as if nature itself wanted to testify against Brenda's logic. Neighbors exchanged looks. Sarah's phone camera zoomed in. Frank grunted something that sounded suspiciously like "good grief." Finally, Ray tilted his head. "Ma'am, wildflowers are not criminal vandalism. They're plants. In her yard. Planted legally." He paused, his cop voice hardening just enough to carry across the lawn. "And you calling 911 over this? That's misuse of emergency services." The crowd rippled murmurs, low chuckles, the first signs of a verdict forming in the court of public opinion. Brenda's lips trembled. For a moment, she seemed to realize she was standing alone against not just Patricia, but the entire neighborhood. Her binder slipped from her hands, pages fluttering across the grass like defeated confetti. Patricia rose, slowly brushing dirt from her knees, and looked Brenda square in the eye. No robe, no gavel, just the steady authority of someone who didn't need either. "Brenda," she said softly, almost with pity, "this ends today." And in that silence, broken only by the buzz of a cicada and Sarah's camera phone. Everyone knew it was over. Ray glanced at the growing cluster of neighbors, every set of eyes fixed on Brenda as if she'd just declared she had proof that gravity was optional. "Ma'am," he asked in his most measured tone, "can you tell me exactly what crime is happening here?" Brenda straightened, clutching her thick binder of HOA paperwork like it was the nation's founding document. "Destruction of shared property, violation of covenants, open defiance of my lawful authority." She rattled off, jabbing the binder in Patricia's direction for emphasis. Ray, unfazed, walked toward Patricia. She rose gracefully, brushing soil from her jeans with the quiet dignity of someone who never doubted that truth eventually outlasts theatrics. "Your Honor," he said, the words landing like a gavel strike. The reaction was immediate. Mrs. Peterson's jaw dropped. Sarah's camera never wavered, but her eyebrows shot sky-high. Even Frank, who'd known for months, pulled his shoulders back with a kind of pride. For Brenda, though, the words landed like a wrecking ball. Her accusatory finger froze mid-air. The folder slipped from her hand, spilling papers across her perfect lawn like shredded confetti. Her lips worked soundlessly before she finally croaked, "Your Honor, she's Judge Patricia Blackwood, Colorado Municipal Court." Patricia confirmed calmly, extending her dirt-smudged hand. Ray shook it with the respect of a man who'd worked beside her for years. The crowd buzzed low murmurs, stifled laughs, neighbors piecing together the twist. This wasn't just a gardener versus an HOA president. This was David and Goliath, except David had been wearing a judge's robes under her gardening gloves all along. "Ma'am," Ray said to Brenda, his patience worn thin, "are you seriously filing a criminal complaint that a municipal judge is planting flowers in her own yard?" Brenda's face cycled through shades like a faulty stoplight, red, purple. But I'm the HOA, I'm the authority here." And then Frank stepped forward, his voice sharp and commanding, the kind of tone only a veteran can deliver. "Officer, this woman has been pocketing our HOA money for years." That was the tipping point. Within 2 days of Ray's on-the-spot arrest, Brenda resigned from every HOA position she held, not just here, but in all 4 neighborhoods where her so-called consulting business operated. Her lawsuit against Patricia? Tossed out with prejudice, meaning it was permanently dead. Once the media caught wind of the scandal, the Attorney General's office moved faster than anyone expected. Turns out, during election season, nobody likes headlines about an HOA president siphoning money from retirees. Brenda pled guilty to fraud, theft, and filing false police reports. Her sentence: 3 years probation, repayment of every stolen dollar, and a lifetime ban from ever sitting on an HOA board again. The restitution checks were nice. Watching her walk into court in handcuffs? Even better. But if you asked Frank, the true victory came a few months later when his tomatoes won first prize at the county fair. By October, we held our first real HOA election with ballots, notices, and rules that actually followed the law. Frank was unanimously elected president, though he complained the entire time that he hadn't wanted the job. Sarah became treasurer, mostly because she was the only one under 60 who could use Excel, and with nearly $34,000 in recovered funds, we built something Brenda could never destroy: a community garden. Rows of vegetables, herbs, and flowers now thrive where her HOA fees once disappeared. On summer mornings, the fragrance of Patricia's wildflowers mingles with basil and fresh tomatoes, a living reminder that neighborhoods grow best when people pull together, not apart. Frank decided to put part of his military pension towards something bigger than himself: a scholarship fund for Willowbrook kids who wanted to study law, public service, or agriculture. 3 students have already benefited, including Sarah's daughter. who now dreams of becoming a civil rights lawyer after watching her mom stand up to discrimination. But the heart of it all came 1 year later, when we held our very first wildflower festival. Patricia's garden was the centerpiece, buzzing with visitors while bluegrass music played and the smell of Frank's legendary barbecue drifted for blocks. Kids laughed, neighbors smiled, and for the first time in years, Willowbrook felt whole again. What Brenda had nearly destroyed our sense of community was reborn. Children played freely without threat of fines. Seniors tended memorial gardens in peace. Families decorated their homes to reflect who they were, not what a rule book demanded. Patricia's wildflowers even gained recognition across the state, featured in magazines, studied by universities, and officially listed as a landmark for native plant restoration. Ironically, Brenda's property value destruction ended up raising home prices by nearly 15%. Our fight set legal precedent that empowered other Colorado neighborhoods to challenge shady HOAs. Lawmakers even passed the Thornfield Accountability Act, strengthening oversight so what happened here wouldn't happen again. Patricia now speaks at national judicial conferences, reminding audiences that justice only works if it's fair for everyone. Just last month, a new neighbor asked Frank if our community was really as drama-free as people said. Frank chuckled, sipped his coffee, and replied, "Drama-free? We've had enough drama to last a lifetime. The difference is we got rid of the one person causing it. And Brenda? She moved to Arizona. Reports say she's already been written up for pool violations and harassing the maintenance staff. Some people just don't change. So here's the lesson. Always demand proof your HOA is properly registered before paying any fines. Keep records, photos, dates, copies of letters. Recognize that selective enforcement can draw federal scrutiny. And most importantly, every community needs a Frank, someone willing to stand tall when bullies try to rule with a clipboard. Now it's your turn. Share your HOA horror stories in the comments. We read them all, and the wildest ones might even appear in a future episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you believe strong neighbors beat petty tyrants every single time. Next week, we'll bring you the tale of a parking enforcer who picked the wrong target, the new director of transportation, while she was standing right there watching. Because in the end, nothing is sweeter than community justice. Well, except maybe Patricia's famous wildflower honey. You've been watching HOA Stories, where entitled Karens always get reality checked. If today's story gave you a spark of satisfaction, hit like, drop your thoughts below, and stay tuned for more suburban justice served hot.